Good morning, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our weekend review stream for last week's Fedex St. Jude Championship. Gonna go through a few things that I noticed strategy-wise, maybe process-wise there for last week's action, and then going to try and figure out what we can learn and implement going forward to perhaps improve on that process. So we'll go through my lineups, some of the GPP winners around the industry, and then, of course, any of your lineups down in chat or in the community contest that you'd like me to look at and give you a little feedback on. So first off, welcome in here. I know it's early. Maybe not for some, right? I know it's like a whole way to 11 a.m. at this point, but I woke up about 45 minutes ago. I needed some extra sleep after the weekend. We had live golf on, PGA to worry about. I was up from like 8 a.m. the whole way until like 2 a.m. for pretty much every single day. So we needed a little bit of extra rest this morning. So we got it. I got a little bit of coffee in the cup too to go out there and wake ourselves up, and some DFS lineups to try and break down too. So shall we get right on into it? So the first thing we're going to do here, and I'm trying to add a little bit of structure to these live streams going forward. So especially the people that are watching it on replay kind of know what to expect. So we're going to start off with a look at the large field GPP. So some of the winning lineups. This is the $5 GPP that we're going to focus on here. And we're going to look at the types of players, right, that made it into those, top 5, top 10 finishers. So we'll kind of go through the thought process, their lineup construction notes here. And then afterwards, we're going to look at my lineups, the community contest after that. So we'll be going through, like I said, GPP winners, my exposure, giving you a little an idea of what I was doing this week, how it went. And then afterwards, going over all your lineups down there. So that's how we'll structure this thing. So when we're taking a look at the large field GPP winner, your winner this week was the Storm 12. So if you happen to be watching this, the Storm, congrats on your huge takedown. More than likely not watching this though, right? There's 95,000 entries in this contest, and not everyone's consuming content. And with this kind of lineup though, I think maybe there's a higher chance that this person consumes content because it was pretty contrarian, right? You had a few pieces that got moderate ownership, right? Like a Rory, a Tommy Fleetwood there was like 14% owned. But then you have guys like a Justin Rose and a Taylor Moore who are like purposeful pivots, right? Guys that people got to go out there and get some differentiation. Your product ownership on this kind of lineup is below the threshold that most pros play with. So it makes me think, right, even though this looks like it was a single entry kind of build, that maybe this guy knew what he was talking about, right? Sometimes we have winners in the large field contest that clearly luck sack their way into things. I don't know if that's the case here, right? It's I would say, well-built lineup, right? Like I said, the product ownership's low enough, and you've got that mix of chalk and pivots that'll get the job done too. So I'm going to go ahead and mute my mic over here, my phone over there. It's blowing up because my brother's being annoying. He wants me to golf with him right now. It's Monday morning when I am my most busy, so he should know better. So let's get that thing on silent over there. But this lineup for 50 grand, right, it makes a whole lot of sense. And let me look around. This might have been his only single entry, right? The reason why I say that is normally people that have more than one lineup, right, like this John J. Birdies guy, right? There's a 2 next to his lineup. That means that it was the second lineup that he entered. This Jimmy guy probably 150 max, right? Because he's got an 82 next to his name. Matt down here, probably another 150 maxer alongside Stat ATL. That all have, large numbers next to their name, right? That means it's at least their 83rd, at least their 86th lineup that they went out there and put in. So the Storm 12 is a good chance that that was a single bullet. And if so, you're not going to get that to happen very often, and a pretty damn good lineup if you were only putting together one. It was ballsy, right? You had your low-owned pivots down there, and then you took the chalk. I got to say, if it was a single entry build, that's ridiculous. Good stuff, bud. John J. Birdies down here in second had my boy Jordan Spieth. Jordan Spieth was somebody I refused to talk up last week. There were a few people on Discord that I sent the goods to, but I had more than a feeling that Jordan Spieth was potentially going to win this week. In fact, I placed the largest wager I've ever put on a golfer before on Jordan Spieth last week. And the reason why I didn't talk him up, didn't want to mush him. It's happened before. Every time I talk about Jordan Spieth, the guy plays like absolute shit. When I play him and don't say a word, he usually goes out there and nearly wins the golf tournament. So I tested that theory this week. It nearly happened. If it wasn't for the Colt Nosed mush on hole number 10, I think we might have gone that victory too, right? Of course, on that hole, made a super sloppy bogey, which you can almost directly attribute to the mush. Obviously, kind of kidding there, but kind of not kidding too, right? I mean, look at that timing. He hit the water ball on 18. He had a water ball on hole 15 too. I mean, just it was a 9-day difference, right, from when he made that comment. So I don't know, a T6 finish works, especially at that kind of price tag and ownership. And the second place lineup in the 95,000 entry contest, right, had a Jordan Spieth in it. So that shows you that he was obviously pretty close to an optimal play, if not actually optimal, when you look at some of the value plays. Corey Connors had the Sunday of his life. I don't know if you guys saw his second 9 scorecard. The guy went absolutely off there. Russell Henley continues to be so consistent. That was a common piece over the top 2 lineups. Same thing with Lucas Glover, obviously. And let's see, I guess Fleetwood, right, was the other player that was common along the top 2 lineups. That's something that I normally like to point out because those are what you had to have, right, to win the GPP, right? This lineup had Spieth. The top one had Rory McIlroy, right? The top lineup had a Taylor Moore, but your second place lineup, only 4 points less than it, didn't have a Taylor Moore, right? It went with a more balanced build with a Corey Connors. The players we need to be looking at here are the ones that are constantly showing up, right? So Fleetwood, right, across all 3 laps. Obviously, your winner, Lucas Glover. You probably could have guessed that, but Fleetwood clearly was a really important piece this week. And then there's Justin Rose again, right? He was in your top lineup up there with the Storm. Let's look at 4. You've got Henley, right? He looks like an important piece here. And then obviously Glover. Let's look at 5th place now. So 5th place had Glover, but it didn't have a lot of those other pieces, right? So you can see the scores start to fall off rather quickly, right? There's a 12-point gap between 5th and 1st place there. And as you go down, right, if you don't have Fleetwood, right, your lineup, it's a little bit harder to get to the top, right? This guy had Lee Hodges, who finished T31. He still finished tied for 5th place because he had the Fleetwood piece, right? He had that Russell Henley piece. Fleetwood, by the way, wasn't really like a low-owned pivot, right? He made plenty of sense out there. So I don't know, just it's worth pointing this out. Let's look at this. This was another Fleetwood lineup with Glover. This one was Rory McIlroy, then a little bit more balanced. This one, same thing, right? Rory, Fleetwood, and then balanced in the 7K range. You can see not a ton of lineups with 6K golfers, right? Like this one has Ben Griffin, who I also had this week. But even getting to Cantlay, who finished 2nd in the playoff, right? This is the first lineup where we see a Patrick Cantlay, right? Isn't that surprising, right? The whole way down here in 9th place. Let's see, are there a bunch of more, right? There's another one tied for 9th. So yeah, having Hovland this week, I think, sorry, I should say, sorry, let me rephrase that. Having Cantlay this week was actually to your detriment, right? He scored 109 fantasy points, which compared to Fleetwood, right, was the same exact score. A lot of that's because Fleetwood made more birdies this week. Obviously, that's a huge factor when it comes to your fantasy scoring. And he was way cheaper, right? He was $700 cheaper. That's the difference, right? It's not the score, right? The ownership's nearly identical on the 2 players, but because of how it affects the rest of your lineup, right? It had a drastic impact on your ability to get to that ceiling score. So that's worth at least pointing out there. You can see 9th, 10th did have Fleetwood. 12th had Hovland, okay. Who Hovland had a pretty decent week, right? 94 fantasy points. Other than that, this lineup was the near nuts. I mean, Adam Schenk killed it. Down there at $6,400, was also only 4% owned. So that was definitely a sharp play this week. I wish I had more Adam Schenk. I probably would have done a little bit better. But yeah, no Lucas Glover was the real detriment for me. We'll talk about my ROI later. Even up top, some of the studs that went off, I just didn't have. And if Jordan Spieth would have won the golf tournament, I would have ended up like 4 or 5x on my main slates just because of my single entries. Because when we get to my single entry, you'll see it was a damn good lineup with Jordan Spieth. That would have completely made up for my main slate stuff, which you probably saw up here. One of the worst weeks I've ever had, period, right? When it comes to large field GPPs, which looking at my player pool, when you see my single entry, right, you're going to be like, how the hell did you only make $91 back on 750 this week? I'm asking myself the same question. I've got no idea. In fact, I made more money on my, I think it was $38 worth of single entries that I entered this week than I even won back in my $750 of GPP lineup. So we go over this every week, right? So I can show you how difficult these large field contests are. And especially when they have nearly 100,000 entries. So it was a tough scene. Let's just bring up the single entry now, right? I finished in 4th in the community contest. And outside of Keegan Bradley, who had a really rough Sunday, everyone finished in the top 24, right? We had Home up there. Spieth played pretty well. Obviously, Hideki had a huge Sunday for us with that comeback 65. Sungjae Im, pretty decent week. He really should have finished in that top 3. He had like 20 feet for eagle on hole 16, which he ran the putt like 5 or 6 feet past. Ended up 3-putting for a par there. He also missed multiple 5-foot birdie putts there on Sunday. So yeah, this lineup, if Jordan doesn't choke, right, and these are huge ifs, right, huge hypotheticals that didn't end up happening, right? So I don't know why I even focus on it. But yeah, if Jordan wouldn't have choked, and if Sungjae just makes his 5-foot birdies, I mean, that's not really asking all that much, right? This lineup takes down this contest, right? It jumps up another like 30, 40 points because of the placement and the birdies that they would have done, and makes me a lot more money back this week. And like I said, I probably would have won money for main slate this week if it weren't for those 2 players. So is what it is. Hats off to everyone that finished ahead of me. We're going to get into all of the top 5 lineups here. It's another thing I want to add to these live streams is we're going to look at all the top 5 finishers. Whether you're here in chat or not, we're going to see the types of builds that got it done in a single entry and what we can learn from it. But before we do so, let's take a look at my exposure, right? I promised you we'd look at my lineups and I'll figure out, I guess, what the heck went wrong for me to only make that back. Because like I said, like even my shitty weeks, like when I go out there and I like don't have the winner, I fade like a lot of the chalk that goes off. Normally I make back like $400. Like that's, I mean, it's still losing money, but it's like kind of expected that you get a good amount back. No idea. I had no idea what the fuck happened there. Really glad that we went out there. We took over 10K this week on props. I made $4,000 on Friday for Showdown, and then for Saturday Showdown, I made another $6,000. So we've taken out over $20,000 this week from playing fantasy. So it's okay that we lost the $650, but I'd rather not do that. Frankly, I'd rather not do that. I think that's pretty obvious. Almost took down the community contest. I saw that, T. Swenny. You're back in that top 10 train, of course. Yeah, I told you, right? You got to be aggressive about it, right? Me and you are going to have bad weeks when it doesn't go well. When it goes well, we're going to go well. You sent me another lineup in the Discord, your best lineup in a $1 single entry. All right, we'll take a look at that as soon as we get through some of my exposure, 100%, especially if it nearly took down a contest, huh? All right, let's talk about my lineups, though. Let's do some shit talking, shall we? Let's get some coffee in us here. So this lineup, right, it's really not that horrible. It doesn't have Lucas Glover, right? That's an issue, right? When he's 10% owned and he's the winner. And I guess it didn't have those top-end players that went off, right? This lineup, even my best one, didn't have Jordan Spieth in it. Didn't have Fleetwood in my player pool. I didn't have Rory in my player pool either. So both of those were huge obstacles, I suppose. And in fact, my first lineup I entered, and this was a hand build I did on like Monday, by the way, ended up being my second best lineup, right? It was a ROM lineup. We threw Homa in there, who I was not expecting to be like my top end finisher when it came to the studs, but like he was a pivot play that I was playing. We had Sungjae there once again, Kim, Rose, and Griot, right? I obviously took some chalk this week, right? We had the Tom Kim chalk. I'd say even John Rahm at like 22, 23%, right? That's pretty high exposure rate. The issue is even my pivots like Justin Rose, like because it's only a 70 player field, right? They're not that low owned, right? Like if you go through these, like Jordan Spieth, 7.1%. Like I can't believe he's my lowest owned player in this lineup. Down here, 4.8% on Sam Ryder. When you're doing product ownerships, especially now that we only have a 50 player field for next week, you have to kind of force in more pivots. Like I think that's why, and this is my hypothesis. This is what I'm trying to get at here. I think the reason why I only made $91 back is because like even the pivots I have that went off were like 5% owned. And that's just because there's less players to work with, right? That's always going to be the case. And I think that's why I hate no-cut events. Like I've always kind of had a really shitty track record at no-cut events. In fact, I can't think of a no-cut event that I've really done well at for my PGA DFS career. So yeah, this week was definitely like that too. And I have to think that maybe it's because of the ownership, right? There's less players to choose from. Ownership is obviously a little bit higher weighted than it is on most weeks. And I think it takes away some of the game theory edge. This is essentially what I'm trying to hint at here is that on a week like this, maybe you just play more chalk. Because like Max Homa, right? I thought he was going to be a pivot play this week. He's 14% owned. Rory is 14% owned, right? Mega chalky, and I say mega chalky, right? John Rahm, 22% owned. Max Homa is still 14% owned. I mean, like, most weeks on tour, right? Like our pivots are like 3-4% owned, like with the Max Homa. And then our high owned players are like Denny McCarthy at 35%, right? I'm sure everyone remembers that. Out there for just the week before at the Wyndham, it's just such a wacky week ownership wise. I mean, like we could bring up the spreadsheet. I'm sure we'll do it at the end of the stream here, but like even the low owned players this week weren't that low owned. Like Adam Schenk, 4%. Like he was $6,400. Let's find a few more. It's just even Matty Fitz, right? No one wanted to play him because of the form. 8.1% owned. So I think that these no cut events, and especially here next week, right, when we only have 50 players, I feel like the game theory edge just is not as substantial. It's not, right? Because there's not as big of a difference between the ownership numbers. And I'm a huge pivot guy. You guys know that. I'm very, very aggressive when it comes to my large field GPP strategy. I don't think that's really the viable strategy in these kind of fields. I think that's why my results this week, and again, I don't want to be too results oriented, but it's not just this week, right? I told you guys, no cut events, not really my thing. I've told you that over the last 2-3 years at least, I've not had some of my better performances at these events. And I think it might be because of my play strategy at them. So next week, we're going to change it up a little bit. Okay. We're going to make this a test case. Again, we can't be too results oriented about it. What I'm more going to be focused on next week are the ownership numbers, right? Are they still condensed like we saw this week, right? Is the, quote unquote pivots like a Max Homa, right? Are they still getting decent amount of ownership here into the teens range? If when we're on this review stream, exactly a week from now, and we get that same kind of situation, it'll probably be a good week, right? Because if that's the case, the game theory edge is slightly diminished, and then it's going out there and just taking the best plays at that point, right? Giving yourself enough chances to get the right combination of players. That's how I'm going to handle it next week. So feel free to still take that super contrarian approach. It's just that over the last 3-4 year sample size, it hasn't worked out as well for me as it does for the larger field stuff, right? Showdowns, extremely volatile, right? Even in a small field like this, even after the cut on the weekend, right? There's still a relatively large edge to go after. It's just that over a 4-round sample, right? When you give these players, multiple outs, 72 holes to work with for a sample, right? The cream rises to the top. The Rorys, the so ons and so forths, right? That got the ownership this week. Lucas Glover, for example. I think that definitely plays a factor, is what I'm trying to get out there. Let's look at my worst lineup. We don't normally do this, but let's do it this week. So my worst lineup this week, believe it or not, and I'm actually glad we brought this up. It was a studs and duds lineup, right? A lot of people were talking about the Scheffler Rahm start. I definitely took a few lineups myself that went that direction. And you can see that, especially down low, right? The 6K options just all sucked. Right, Denny McCarthy, I went for that bounce back at relatively low ownership. That did not work out. That's for damn sure. Alex Smalley, 65th place. That was another real trash performance. And yeah, just in general, that 6K range kind of bummed out. You had Ben Griffin, who played well. You had Adam Schenk, right, who finished up there in the top 10 too. And then outside of that, I don't think a ton of 6K golfers. In fact, let's just double check with some of the top end guys. Any real 6K guys showing up, right? We knew about Schenk. We knew about Ben Griffin. Sam Ryder, right? He was 6K, but I think that was more the price tag than anything there. Same thing with Nick Taylor, right? He was $6,200. I guess this 9th place lineup, right, was that really studs and duds kind of approach, right? But it wasn't Rory and Rahm there. Right? Sorry. It wasn't Rahm and Scotty there, I should say, right? It was Rory, Cantlay, Fleetwood. So I guess the studs and duds could have worked out if you took the right duds. And the bigger issue for me was, right, I had the right duds. I didn't have the right studs in the lineup, right? I didn't have the Rorys, the Fleetwoods, and whatnot. Using Rahm and Scotty, evidently it was the wrong week to do so. See, our second worst lineup had Spieth in it. How's that happen? Guy top 6 finished. The rest of the lineup was just utter dog shit. Okay, let's look at our third worst lineup here, which I never do this, by the way. I find it especially entertaining on a week this bad. This lineup had Kirk. Kirk actually played pretty well. Believe it or not, yeah, when he scored the most points of your lineup, second most behind a Jon Rahm, that's not a good thing at this kind of field. There's the GOAT, Eric Cole. A heck of a week for him once again. I know T31's not amazing, but he still made it into the top 50. We'll see him again. Pretty solid stuff. All right, that's enough joking at my lineups. Let's hop over to the community side and start to go through some lineups. So first off, we'll go through T Swinney's lineup down there in the $1 single entry. And if you guys want your lineups reviewed in the community contest, just let me know down in the live chat. We will be reviewing lineups 1 through 5. So if you're one of those people, probably don't have to throw your name down there, but otherwise, definitely let me know. So let me bring that up, T Swinney. We'll definitely take a look at your lineup. Let's bring up Discord. There we go. And get this thing shared for y'all. All right, so T Swinney is a $1 single entry, right? So he 12x'd on this. So don't look at the $12 and go like, what the hell, right? Like it's a damn good lineup. Scored 557. What would that have scored in our community contest? That would have taken it down, right? So you would have just out-edged Delbert McFly for the victory. So yeah, this is a hell of a lineup here, right? This is a top like 1-2 percentile type of lineup. Yeah, JJ Spawn, who was kind of average, but definitely didn't hurt you. He was a source of ownership leverage. So obviously, if JJ Spawn had a big week, this lineup would have performed even better. Outside of that, right, Sibu Kim relatively low owned. I like to see that ownership number on a high upside player. Cam Davis, you can say the same thing about, right? So you had like 3 sub 10% owned players. Homa, a little bit lower owned in this contest than most. That's because of the single entry kind of thing. The more I think about it, and I'm so glad I looked at this T Swinney, and I probably should have looked at my single entries for some of the ownership numbers too. Like Homa, 10%, like that's a pivot, right? Now, we expected him to be a pivot for the main slate stuff, but because of the fact they had that condensed field, right, he was higher owned than he probably should have been. Maybe for next week, I just do more single entries, right? Knowing that in single entries, people play a little bit more conservatively, right? They're a little bit less likely to get to pivots as they are in large field GPPs. And maybe that's where the game theory edge is. So it's interesting. Okay. I think we're kind of crafting the strategy here for next week, right? You know, in large field GPPs, maybe embrace the chalk a little bit more just because of the format. And then in single entries, know that you are going to get that game theory edge, right? Like T Swinney was able to here, right? You got the lower owned Homa. I know Sibu Kim was even higher owned in a lot of the GPPs. So you also got him at even more of an ownership pivot. And I'd guess same thing with Spawn too, right? In fact, let me double check on JJ Spawn's ownership. I have a feeling that Spawn was like slightly higher owned even there. Because if this is the case, I think we figured out what we're doing for next week for sure. Let's see. Let's find good old JJ Spawn. I was just downloading the ownership. So he was 4.9%. So that's pretty much online. But yeah, definitely the case with a few of the other players there. Up top, I like that you avoided those elite tier options. I did so with my single entry too. I started with the Jordan Spieth like you saw. So starting with the Hovland Cantlay, I know the ownership percentages aren't that low, but a lot of times they're being used as the second man in, right? That studs and duds approach was extremely common this week. So to bypass that, right, still take a few popular players towards the top. I think that you have some built-in differentiation just based on your lineup construction here, right? Just based on the fact that you avoided Rory, Rahm, and Scotty up there. Max Homa, decent pick. Like I said, T6 finished. You can't argue with that. And definitely had that differentiation there. All right, let's hop into these top 5 finishers. And hopefully my mic isn't too loud for you guys. I've got some landscaping people outside doing some lawn mowing. So again, hopefully it's not too annoying for you. So Delbert McFly finished in first this week. He used my boy Jordan Spieth, who of course was much higher owned in our contest than most because let's face it, right? Everyone in the community loves Jordan Spieth. So I like to see that Delbert used him there. He did have Fleetwood and Homa, 2 extremely sharp plays, mixed in Hideki Matsuyama, Connors, and Todd. Overall, really checks all the boxes we're looking for, right? Has a few ownership pivots. Maybe for a large field GPP, I don't love this kind of lineup because like Connors was still 10% owned, right? Todd was like 8 to 10% owned, depending on what contest you were in. And those were your lowest owned players. So I guess you had Spieth, who was some differentiation up top. So large field GPP, this is a little chalky, but we're not in a large field GPP, right? We're in a single entry. There's only 64 entries in here. So in terms of this contest, single entry 2 to 3 maxes, this is just fine, right? You don't have to have your product ownership super low in these kind of contests. It's more have 1 or 2 spots that you can move up the board and take advantage of them, right? Which is exactly what Delbert did. Jordan Spieth, his piece of leverage went off, right? Didn't matter, right? That he had a few, slightly higher owned pieces in that mid-tier range. Corey Connors, right, at just 4.7%, absolutely went off this week. So heck of a lineup, man. You kicked my butt this week, even with a decent lineup. And really nothing I can say for criticism, right? Even constructive criticism. I think you did a good job here. Just that if you also put this in a large field GPP, that you'd run into a few of the issues that I did, right? Like Homo wasn't as much of a pivot as I think that we were expecting, right? Fleetwood was obviously higher owned in some of those contests. And like I said, Corey Connor's not nearly as low owned in those kind of contests. So I guess it depends where you entered it. You had T. Swenny here, so we just looked at one of his other lineups, but he used Jordan Spieth here, which I love to see. Outside of that, right, Griot, right, he was kind of chalky, but Thigala, Davis, they were pivots pretty much no matter what contest you were in. Same thing with Jordan Spieth. This kind of lineup would be good regardless of like the contest you're entering. Right? This could be a single entry, this could be a GPP, and you'd be fine with it. Has more than enough pivots. But in terms of median projection, like if you ran this into an optimizer, right, and tried to see whether it made sense, it'd probably still be like a top 2 percentile kind of lineup, right? You have a few pivots, like I know Thigala with this form wasn't an optimal play. Same thing with Jordan, right? Like there were better plays in that 9K range, especially when it came to median projection. But it wasn't like you were giving up an arm and a leg, right? They were just like a Slate tier below when it came to their median projection. So I like this a whole lot there, right? You had your pivots, but they weren't crazy pivots. So that's the important part. Chris Haley there in third. He started off with more of like a studs and duds approach, which I was definitely with you there. A very balanced build from the bottom tier range, right? A bunch of guys there in that like T20, T25 range. You had your winner in Lucas Glover. Just a real solid lineup. I mean, in a large field GPP, you'd run into some of the same issues as a Delbert, I think, right? You only have like 1-2 pivots in here. In a, I guess Spawn would only really be your only pivot in this kind of lineup. So in a single entry 2 to 3 max, just fine, Chris. Obviously, still had plenty of leverage to get to the top. But in a large field GPP, this is like on the edge of being a lineup that I'd personally enter, right? I would most likely try and take one player here and add in a pivot, but you can get the job done with it, I suppose. Just maybe not in a no-cut event, right, when there's not as many players. This is my lineup. I think we already went over this. I had Jordan Spieth in there, Max Homa, Matsuyama, Sanjay M. Yikes. Tom Kim and Keegan Bradley down there. Just, I don't know. I don't even know how I finished in fourth. This lineup kind of sucks, right? Doesn't it? Like, I don't have the winner in it. Just a bunch of guys that finished like T6 up there with these three. I know that Hideki got a bunch of points because of the birdies that he was making, but like Tom Kim T25, that wasn't that good. And then T43 for Keegan Bradley. So the fact that I finished in fourth out of 64 entries, kind of outstanding. Just outstanding. I don't know how it happened. Kind of surprises me. Doesn't really make sense. So I'll take it. The ROI across some of the other single entries I entered, I was like 4 or 5x. So that kind of saved our week, but unexpected. Lineup really wasn't that good. Fleetwood there, much better play rate. T3 finish, T13 for Hovland. So you had a few chalky pieces up top. Not in this contest, though, right? Both of those were exceptionally low-owned players. And then Homa, Connors, Smalley, and Neesmith. Completely fine with it, right? Especially because they were low-owned in this contest because I wasn't playing them this week, right? And if that's a strategy you want to go with, that makes perfect sense, by the way, right? I mean, if you know somebody's going to be lower-owned in one specific contest for one reason or another, then maybe take advantage of it. Don't think it's a bad idea. M-Tom here. A little bit of a chalky Morikawa, but that's okay, right? You had English, you had Davis as pivots. This would work in a large field GPP. Uzi Beats definitely could work in a large field GPP, right? You know, Spieth as a little bit of leverage. I'd say even Cam Young with some leverage there in the mid tier. Spur, yeah, this had plenty of pivots. Just the pivots didn't work out, right? Like Sepp Straka, pretty shitty week. Ricky Fowler, right? Let me down as well. So, now that I look at it, right, you had Spieth and Fowler as quote unquote pivots. I'm okay with it. I was gonna say maybe it was a little chalky, but it's probably okay. It's just me being a little nitpicky. See Roman there with Terrell Hatton. I forgot all about him this week. He did not play like I expected him to. And then you had Kuchar down there. Okay. Did you cash with this? You did. 2.31. Okay. UK Mr. Bean here. Pretty solid lineup across the board. This had plenty of pivots, right? You had the AN pivot. You had the Tony Finau pivot, who was certainly a pivot in the 8K range, came in even lower owned than I was expecting. I know he didn't play well. I know it didn't pay off, right? But if he gives you any sort of like top 10 finish at just 6% ownership, I mean, you skyrocket from 494 points to probably at least like second, third place. So UK Mr. Mean, if you're watching this in replay, I know you do most of the times out here. It maybe wasn't the performance you were hoping for, but this lineup was like perfectly executed, right? Like Ricky Fowler stunk at his ownership. Like that's just going to happen, right? But the rest of it paid off. Like you took that Connors Henley and that 7K range and ran with it. They were like the nuts play this week. Even like Benny Ann played pretty decently for his price tag. You just got to get Tony Finau to play like Tony Finau, right? Which you'd expect more often than not, and you would have had a heck of a week. So I like that. D. Dean down there, Dave, I know, watches these live streams. Let's see. Brendan Todd, pivot, okay. Yeah, like this is good for a single entry. Another large field GPP lineup that I might be a little bit sketched on when it came to the ownership numbers. Let's see, this one, same thing, honestly. Which, honestly, if you're just doing this in the single entry, that's fine. But the reason why I want to mention that is if you're also putting this in large field GPPs, like Den Dog's fine here. He's got some pivots, right? Mike Honcho here, he's fine. He's got at least a few pivots in there. Like Aaron Rye, for example. Maybe this one's on the border too, honestly. The reason why I want to point this out is that in a large field GPP, especially if you were in like the 95,000 entry GPP like I'm in, you've got to start to think about ownership maybe a little bit more. So I wanted to point that out. See if there's any questions down there. Thigala was under 70 all 4 rounds. Very rare. Yeah, that is really rare, T. Frankly, when's the last time that's happened for Thigala? That shit does not happen very often. You played him this week, huh? I know you're a Thigala hater sometimes, T. I know you don't like playing him for props. That's for damn sure. But hey, that's fine. He's very inconsistent. But maybe he's getting back to being consistent if he shoots all under 70s, right? Let's look at when the last time that happened. Like legitimately, I don't know if it's happened before. And if you played him this week, maybe you're like the whisperer because the fades on him normally work out, right? Especially like the par 5 fades. If we could just fade him on par 5s. Look at this. I don't think he's ever done it before. No, he did it at the RSM Classic, but that's because the course is easy as hell. It's a par 70, right? Has he done it before that? Not this season. So he's done it one time this season, other than last week. And last week, obviously, was a much more difficult golf course than what they played at the RSM Classic. Maybe he's going to have himself a week. I don't know. That sets up pretty well for him, huh? Let's take a look at this GCSAA sheet, which, by the way, is the Greenskeeper Association, right? It's where they post all the data for the golf courses. And take a little look at the BMW, shall we? And then we'll hop on out of here. I've got a course preview to do, some projections. You guys know the deal. But I'm going to give you guys another minute to throw your lineups down in chat if you want them reviewed. If not, we're going to hop on out of here. So just looking at the BMW this week, this is the course they played in 2022 for this golf tournament. And they've played it a bunch in the past. The issue is other than that like 2020 tournament, it hasn't been recently, right? They've played US Opens here before. They've played PGA Championships 2 times a piece here at Olympia Fields. But it was like way back in the day. I think the last one was like the early 2000s. And I think it was the last US Open that they played here at Olympia Fields. But just know it's kind of like a major championship type of track, right? The reason why I point out that history to it is that the rough here can definitely get a little bit gnarly. It depends on how they cut it. You can see this week it says Kentucky Bluegrass 4 inches plus. So you'd have to think, right, it's going to be that rough US Open type of rough again. And it depends on how firm and fast the golf course is. When it's been played for major championships, it's been firm and fast. In fact, the last time they played the BMW here, John Rahm won it like -6. I think only like 6-7 players broke par that week. So you're talking about like a real test. A par 70 that's a little bit longer than most par 70s. Not a bunch of water in play, but that rough, that 4-inch bluegrass rough, has been just ridiculously difficult at this golf course. So we're going to have to take a look at the weather. If it's firm and fast, winning score is going to be in the single digits under par. If it's a little bit damper this year, which I'm not sure of yet, I still got to do my research on the weather up there in Chicago. It might play 10-15 under par, right? There could be a huge difference there. So Other than that, bent grass greens, bent/POA greens. The fairways are also bent POA, and then you've got that bluegrass rough. Yeah, other than that, the whole course breakdown is going to have a little bit more, but a lot of it's going to come down to that weather. I can tell you that much. Until then, though, guys, appreciate all the support here on the channel. My throat's giving away, so it's a good thing we're hopping out of here right now. But I appreciate all of you guys for your support here. Hit that like button on the way out. Hopefully, we can make this week a little bit better for the DFS side. Like I said, Showdown was great. We ended up more than profiting on that side. Props were ridiculous, but let's make it 3 for 3 this time, right? Main slate can be a little bit tough, but if we go out there, get ourselves towards the top of some of those GPPs, maybe we can take down a nice score there. Again, appreciate the support here, guys. I'll be getting here. A course breakdown out here in the next hour or two, so keep an eye out for that. And of course, all the DFS content and betting content throughout the week.